Throughout the course of history, we have witnessed economic instability and poverty. Occasionally, we think of newly independent African countries that were once run under imperialism. In other terms, there are a lot of known economic problems in countries once under imperialism that we notice today. Fortunately, in our modern times, imperialism has become a thing of the past, and we've now come into contact with more modern causes to economic instability, such as the Great Recession. In this lesson, I will discuss similarities and differences of economic instability and poverty in modern-day Greece and 19th century India. We will be looking at the differences such as roots to their economic problems and difficulties they each face which made recovery more tough. For similarities, we will view civil disobedience against the government and unemployment. Starting with their roots, this chart compares Greece to the Great Depression and the United States and gives an idea of the actual immensity of the economic downfall in Greece after the Great Recession. The bottom numbers represent the change over years since the crisis began, and the numbers on the left don't give exact numbers of the GDP, but a percentage change is able to be measured from those values. As seen, the GDP, which stands for Gross Domestic Product, has dropped 26% at its lowest within 6 years of the Depression. GDP is what's used to measure economic progress, which had a large decline in Greece in the year of 2013. The Great Recession largely affected Greece. It is the cause of failure in their markets. With economic collapse, Greece fell into tremendous debt as it received large loans from the European Bank. There was little interest to pay in return, which is why Greece is able to obtain so many loans. This next chart shows the amount of debt they are in, which is roughly about 322 billion euros in debt. Currently, it has moved up to 377 billion, and it's growing quickly. The chart represents the percentage owed to who. Greece owes most of their debt to the Eurozone, which has invested so much money in supporting Greece through their crisis. Greece's current problems, unfortunately, threaten their membership in the Eurozone. Now onto the causes for India economic collapse. This first photo of Indian imperialism, which lasted 200 years, introduces the relationship between Great Britain and India. By looking, one can conclude that the British had an upper hand in the relationship, one that may have even took advantage of India's citizens. And this is exactly true. The East India Trade Company took advantage of Indian trade, and most of the profit went to Great Britain rather than aiding in India's development. Later, India had gained independence and was left with limited consumer goods, which made a very unstable and sensitive economy. They were also undeveloped, which made a switch from consumer goods difficult. Trade is a major key to success, and Great Britain had deprived them of this. They had economic instability and little jobs because of the small trade. A large population meant a lot of people out of work. India was basically kept from collapse during British rule and was not structured to function on their own when given independence. Altogether, this led to economic instability for quite some time. Independence may have been a victory, but it was a door open in which India had to face its internal problems. Greece and India, with their different causes for economic collapse, faced their own problems that made reviving their respective countries nearly impossible. This first photo is a representation of the negative effects of the crisis on the citizens. These are the results of the austerity measures. Austerity measures refer to official actions taken by the government during a period of adverse economic conditions. Greece called for a decrease in wages and increase in taxes. The tax increase is represented by this graph. This failed as citizens failed to pay these newly increased taxes. The government was not able to assemble the money they needed, so they got more loans. Their continuous cycle of growing debt threatens their other countries in the Eurozone, which is currently Greece's best support that prevents them from complete collapse. But because of the bad conditions, they may be expelled from the Eurozone until they can get back up on their feet. India's major problem during its attempts to recover from the effects of imperialism was overpopulation. During a time of sensitive trade, there was a quickly growing one. This chart represents the population increase in lakhs, which is a measurement in India that means 100,000. Looking at the chart, the population of its time during independence was roughly 390 million. India was densely populated. With the failing economy and population, many required aid from the government. Material deprivation was in effect, which called for more consumer goods. This could not be supported by the consumption poverty, so a large amount of resources were being returned to the citizens rather than traded. To aid the citizens of poverty, production and agriculture was increased while industrialization decreased. A sluggish economy was the result, and it became hard to structure a strong trade at the same time of dealing with the population and poverty. During the economic crisis in Greece and 19th century India, both faced similar outcomes of large unemployment. The failure of business during the Greece crisis made it hard for them to maintain profits, which resulted in large unemployment. This photo represents the unemployment rate and shows that most of the unemployment ranges between citizens below the age of 25. Almost 50% of the youth are unemployed, and this is because the youth had a difficulty getting jobs. This is because the jobs needed for the economy to recover require a lot of skill that the newly educated just didn't have. Wages were reduced as an attempt to hire more youth, but that failed. The immense unemployment has also resulted in nearly 500,000 people fleeing the country for better opportunities, and these people that are leaving are the highly educated, which resulted in a weak link between the educational system and the labor market. In turn, the very future progress of Greece may not occur if those educated are unable to replace jobs. In India, unemployment also occurred during and after imperialism because of the poor trade England had created. The English had limited their trade, which resulted in little jobs, so there was little opportunity for the large population. This problem created a very specific and non-diverse workforce. This destruction of industry in India led to an unemployment on a large scale. There was no development in the educational system as well, which meant most of the population was uneducated. This made it even more difficult to find jobs. A lack of differentiated jobs caused a sharp decline in business, which meant slow economic progress. Poor trade and a lack of education proved difficult in creating more jobs, so unemployment remained a problem. In this chart of unemployment, the percentage may not be as devastating as that of Greece, but it is a large percentage for such a large population. It shows lasting unemployment throughout years, and it has finally begun to decrease after 2010 as its economy develops. Social unrest has fomented under the conditions of economic instability in Greece and India. In Greece, many were unemployed and unable to get back up on their feet due to the austerity measures that had created a lot of tension between the government and its citizens. As a result, multiple protests occurred. As an example, a peaceful protest took place in Athens and Thessalonica, speaking against the government in debt and its austerity measures. These protests were examples of civil disobedience that were organized by labor unions. This really gives insight of the citizens' feelings in the wake of their recession. Over time, as conditions worsened, protests evolved into violent ones. The relationship between the government and its citizens has weakened significantly, and this negative relationship only worsens the crisis as the population also collapses under the pressure of the economic conditions. This final photo represents how violent the protests currently reach. To sum it up, civil disobedience was caused by the austerity measures and unemployment. India, when under imperialism, had its fair share of civil disobedience as well as they aimed to gain their independence. Near the end of imperialism, during the time of Gandhi, is when most of this civil disobedience took place. An example of this civil disobedience that happened in India was when citizens continued their salt trade even though it had been made illegal to produce because the British basically wanted a monopoly over it. Salt was a lucrative trade for Indians, and when England had monopolized it, this also put many out of work, which is where Gandhi comes in. Gandhi began the Salt March in 1930, and this historical event helped lead to massive civil disobedience. This salt march inspired citizens to keep producing the salt as they turned against the government. This was Gandhi's largest led civil disobedience act that played a huge role in India gaining its independence. The amount of people that joined in on the production of salt post the march was massive, and around 60,000 people were arrested as a result. Now what? What is grasped from this lesson is the similarities and differences that occur in two economic crises that had their own causes. We are now able to conclude that many countries, when in economic crisis, have many negative effects such as civil disobedience or unemployment, which was viewed in both Greece and India. Currently, Greece is still in a tight position during its problems, and it's quite too soon to decipher what its outcome may be. The end.